What is accelerated resolution therapy, or ART? Accelerated resolution therapy is a structured trauma therapy that helps people get unstuck from distressing memories and body reactions by changing how those memories are stored and triggered. It uses guided sets of eye movements that get paired with specific imagery to really help the brain and body update what's happening in the present moment. So instead of only talking about what happened back then, ART is designed to help the nervous system stop responding like the event is happening right now. You'll still be able to remember what happened, but the memory doesn't keep hijacking your brain, your body, your emotions, or your day in the same way. We're going to get into all the details of ART in a second, but real quick, tell me, what do you want to know about this model? Drop it in the comments so we can keep the conversation going together here. And if you don't know me, hi, I'm Dr. Jenny Hughes, trauma psychologist and founder of the Brave Trauma Therapist Collective, where we make sure that trauma therapists actually have something left over for themselves at the end of the day. All right, let's get into it. First, a quick bit of background. ART was developed in 2008 by Lainey Rosenweig, and she was trained in EMDR and then built ART as its own approach. And something you might hear people say is ART is EMDR adjacent, or that it grew out of EMDR. And in a lot of ways, that's basically true in the sense that both approaches do use eye movements as part of the reprocessing. But ART has its totally own structure and its own protocols. And it can sometimes tend to be more directive and step by step, which is part of what makes it feel really efficient for certain kinds of targets or things that you're working on in therapy. So let's talk about what ART is, what it tends to look like in the room, and why it can be such a powerful option for certain kinds of trauma work. The simplest way that I know how to describe it is that ART is designed to help your brain and body stop reacting to a memory like it's happening right now. Talked about that earlier, right? In trauma, I'm bringing it up again because in trauma, the knowing part of the brain can understand I'm here right now in my office, I'm safe, it's over, I'm not under threat. But the survival part, those lower parts of the brain and body can still react as if that danger is present. And ART is one way of working with that gap. And a big part of it involves the client briefly bringing up a distressing memory while doing sets of guided eye movements, and then using an imagery process that helps change how the memory is experienced and stored internally. And this is one of the key ideas that people associate with ART, that you get to keep the facts of what happened, but the emotional charge can drop. So you're not losing your story when you do this. You're not being convinced that it didn't happen or being gaslit. You get to update the way that it lives inside you. And the outcomes of ART can start to happen really fast for some people. So let's talk about why it can sometimes be associated with this really fast, significant progress in a small number of sessions. So in the research and clinically, many therapists describe it as a model that can move really fast, especially when someone has a clear, specific target, like a single incident trauma, a vivid, intrusive image that just kind of keeps showing up, a specific trigger that reliably will hijack your nervous system, or even a phobia-like response tied to a certain memory or experience. And when the target is clear, ART can sometimes help clear out the stuckness faster than people expect. But I'm not going to sell you a fantasy. It's not magic. It's not a golden ticket. No trauma therapy is. And not everyone clears their target in a few sessions, and that's okay too. Also, fast isn't always or necessarily better. We want to be aware of how and if a person's nervous system can actually tolerate any kind of trauma work. Now, let me walk you through the general flow of an ART session so you can kind of take a little glimpse under the hood. Usually an ART session starts with a brief check-in, then you identify a target or the thing you want to work on, and the therapist will then usually ask some questions like, when you bring up that memory or that phobia, what is the worst part about it? And where do you feel it in your body? What emotions are there? What does your mind believe about you when you think about it? Then the work begins in sets, and the client brings up the target memory and tracks what they notice internally, while the therapist guides the eye movements at a certain rate and number. The therapist is going to be monitoring distress level for the client, body cues, and pacing the session really intentionally. And this is all quite similar to EMDR, which we talked about at the beginning of this video, right? Then comes the imagery piece, which is part of what makes ART stand out for a lot of people. In ART, clients are often guided through a process of changing the images associated with the memory in a way that helps the nervous system update. Some people describe it like changing the movie in your head so that your brain and body will stop responding like the original version is still running on a loop. And for some people, that's a huge relief because it can be less about telling the whole story out loud in detail and more about working directly with what the brain is replaying. Now, quick note here. Even if and when a model doesn't require a detailed verbal retelling, it can still bring up really deep material. So when you think, oh, I don't have to describe it, doesn't mean, oh, I won't feel it, okay? It means the pathway to healing is different, regardless of how much or how little you're sharing about your story. And even with this general structure and the many skilled scripts available to ART therapists, ART is still super flexible because you see the structure, it gives the therapist a really clear roadmap. You're not just wandering around in the memory, hoping that it shifts. And there's instead an organized sequence and a way of tracking what's changing. And the flexibility built into ART is in the various protocols that can be applied to different kinds of targets, different symptom presentations, and different needs of the client in the room. And that combination can be really appealing to trauma therapists and their clients because it can feel so grounding for the clinician while still leaving room for attunement, pacing, and individualized care for the client. Now, before we get any further, let's clear up some misconceptions, okay? 1, is ART just EMDR? No. And I get why people ask that because from the outside, it looks really similar. Both approaches use guided eye movements as part of the process, and ART was developed by a clinician who was EMDR trained. But ART is its own model with its own structure, its own sequence, and its own set of protocols. The goals overlap in the sense that both are trauma reprocessing approaches, but the way you get there can feel different in the room and in the relationship. So if you've heard it's basically EMDR, I'd translate that as, yeah, they're in the same neighborhood, but they're not the same house. 2, will this erase my memory? No, ART isn't about deleting anything about what happened to you or making you forget your story. We simply can't do that. Instead, it's about changing how your nervous system responds when the memory gets activated. A lot of trauma work comes down to this. You can know something is over, but your body still responds like it's happening right now. ART aims to reduce that charge so the memory becomes more like a past event that you can remember instead of a present threat that your body keeps reacting to. And if you're someone who worries that changing imagery sounds like rewriting history, I want you to hear me really clearly when I say this, okay? The point's not to deny reality. The point is to help the brain and body stop reliving it. 3, if it can work fast, does that mean it's shallow? No, not necessarily. Fast doesn't automatically mean shallow, and slow doesn't automatically mean deep. What matters is whether the work is actually integrated and whether the person's system stays within a tolerable range while the work is happening. Some targets are surprisingly clean, meaning the distress is organized around a really specific image, moment, or trigger. And when you process that target effectively, things can shift really quickly. Other targets are layered and complex, and they shouldn't be rushed. So maybe a better or a different question isn't, is fast real? Perhaps the question is this the right pace for this person and this target with enough support around it? 4, is ART safe for everyone? This is the one where I want to be the most honest and the most grounded. ART can be a great fit for many people. It can also be the wrong starting point for others, depending on things we've already talked about, right? Stability, level and significance of dissociation, current stress, and importantly, support outside the therapy space. Any trauma reprocessing model can be too much too soon if someone doesn't have enough resourcing, if they're in ongoing danger, or if their nervous system tends to shut down or fragment when activated. Safety is not just about the method, it's about pacing, consent, the therapist's skill, and whether the client has what they need to come back to baseline after the session. So, if you're considering ART, the green flag is a therapist who's collaborative, checks readiness, and makes it clear that you are in the driver's seat. And for all the trauma therapists watching, here's what I want you to take from this. ART, like any trauma reprocessing model, is not just a set of steps. It asks a lot of the clinician. It asks for strong nervous system tracking, strong consent culture, pacing skills, and the ability to slow down when the protocol says go, but the person's body says not yet. And this is where I'm going to bring it back to something that I talk about all the time. You cannot do this work well in isolation, trauma therapist. I'm talking to you. Whether you're learning ART, EMDR, brain spotting, CPT, PE, you name the freaking acronym, the method is only as safe as the clinician's support system. Consultation, community, and having people who can help you think through stuck points is not optional if you want your work as a trauma therapist to be sustainable. So, big picture. ART is a structured, trauma-focused therapy that uses eye movements and imagery-based reprocessing to help the brain and body stop responding to a memory like it's happening right now. For some people, especially with clear targets, it can support meaningful shifts in a small number of sessions. And at the same time, it's not a magic fix. Healing is still relational. Integration still matters. Support super matters. And if you're a trauma therapist watching this and you've been feeling the weight of this work, the self-doubt, the isolation, the emotional load, you don't have to carry that alone. That's why I built the Brave Trauma Therapist Collective. It's a place where trauma therapists can be human, can get support, and stay in this work without burning out. And if you're here as a client or a human who's curious about trauma therapy, I hope this helped you understand ART a little more clearly and maybe gave you language for what you want to ask next. Okay, we made it to the end. So tell me one more time in the comments, what else do you want to know about ART? What part of this model are you still curious about, skeptical about, or wanting me to break down next?